Hello, my fellow witches, sorcerers, and other magical practitioners. My name is Aiden, and welcome back to Sky Snake Sorcery. In this episode, we will be talking about sigils, image magic, and the way that they relate back into each other and into many other types of magic. For those who are new here, my name is Aiden. I'm a witch of many different paths, many different practices, and many different traditions that all coincide together in the wonderful crooked path that I walk along. So this episode will contain both theory and practice on how to use sigils, image magic, and anything like them. And you can adapt them and take notes as you desire, changing things around, using them in whatever way you personally find most useful. I'll kind of split the episode into 3 parts, the first part being just the theory of sigils, second part theory of image magic, and the third part the cohesion of both and much more practical applications as well as my own personal experiences with them. I'll kind of be talking about them in both theoretical, practical ways, but also some of my own personal experiences, things I've seen used before in other places. This is a topic that I really enjoy. I love the use of sigils and image magic. I find that they're not utilized in all the ways that I find really unique and interesting. So I hope to give y'all some ideas of what you can do with them, the real versatility of them, and how they can really be adapted into almost any kind of working. In all honesty, they're great to add into just about any type of spell work. So let's start at the very base of what is a sigil. A sigil is really any symbolic image carrying a distinct purpose within it, which is, kind of vague, and there's a lot of argument to be had about what can really be considered a sigil and if you can truly just consider everything a sigil. There is that grand overarching theory that once you zoom back out, everything is a sigil. You are a sigil, I'm a sigil, this podcast is a sigil, the earth is a sigil, every tree is a sigil in its own way. But what I'm going to be using here as the base definition is any sort of symbol, whether that is, the glyph of Mars, all the way to a constructed sigil that you use the Rosy Cross method to delineate. Anything that is a symbol drawn out that is a representation for something else, that is what we're going to constitute as a sigil. Now, this can be anything from a spirit seal to a sigil representing a desired outcome, a goal, the sigilized intent, or anything further out from there. Arguably, the very first sigils were the earliest symbols drawn in cave paintings designed to invoke some type of power. They oftentimes overlapped with early image magic, early forms of apotropaic magic, other sorts of symbol-based sorcery. This is all very arguable, this is all very debated, because you can argue that cave paintings simply had no spiritual underlying purpose. Other people very strongly believe that they do. I think it's kind of both. Some cave paintings were definitely just for fun. Others do have a much more ritualized purpose to them. This would evolve along throughout all of human history, and eventually we would start to get what we now often recognize as the classic sigils of spirits, such as the demonic sigils of the Ars Goetia, the various angelic sigils found in Heptameron. Really, any grimoire will have sigils in it classically for the various spirits that it intends to call. Not always. There are also plenty of grimoires that don't really have sigils or seals of spirits, but instead would have things like pentacles, which kind of border between image magic and sigil magic. And these sigils or seals would be the secret sign by which they can be called and invoked by, allowing you to make pacts with them, allowing them to actually engage with them, evoking them via the sigil to bring about their presence, essentially. These sigils would then also be usable in things like charms and spells, where you would take that spirit's sigil, you would draw it onto something, you would give it certain things, and then it would be used in magic. We'll talk a bit more about that later on though. But this idea was pretty prevalent for quite some time, and then eventually it started evolving into much more sigilized intents. We did have a little bit of that within the grimoires, where it's draw these characters and they'll have this effect. We had the geomantic sigils, where the geomantic figures were turned into sigilized forms that could be used to evoke the power and presence of these figures. We really don't see the techniques and methods of sigil making and sigil usage until much later in the 20th century. Austin Spare really came in and developed sigils further through Zoskia Cultus, which was his own personal practice, his own personal system of using magic, especially through sigils, through the subconscious realm, and putting them deep within the mind to evoke them further and allow them to gestate, combining the divine feminine and masculine mysteries together to create this space where sigils could actually gestate and turn into fully fledged powers. I highly recommend reading the Book of Pleasure or reading any commentaries on it, reading Kenneth Grant's scholarship on Austin Osman Spare, both when he was alive and after Spare's passing. There's a lot of really great resources on Spare out there. I will try and share some later on in the description of this episode. But suffice to say, Spare really spearheaded this new method of sigilization, using things like the alphabet of desire to create sigils and images that were oriented around getting a particular effect. Spare would also use various methods such as the Earthenware Virgins operation, which you can read about in the Zoetic Grimoire of Zos, which is part of Kenneth Grant's book, Zos Speaks, which I highly recommend checking out if you're able to find it in any capacity. Now, a lot of this idea was built around entering into states of pure ecstasy, entering into states where you were able to remove the conscious mind to open up the cave that is the gateway to the subconscious. Very much Plato's cave in many ways comes to mind with this. A lot of this was achieved through orgasmic release. That's the nice way of saying it. But it was very much a ritualized process. It was very much a deeply spiritual process that would kind of be corrupted and kind of be taken in various directions over the years. Austin Osman Spare is often credited as being the father of chaos magic, or what we now call chaos magic, though chaos magic takes quite a different approach to the practice of sigils and using them that is pretty different from Zoskia cultus. Chaos magic really developed it a lot further and used all kinds of different methods. The most popular method probably being the very basic, take your desire, take all the letters from that are not vowels and that aren't repeating, and turn that into an image, and then boom, you have your image. The use of orgasms is also brought in here. However, I often find it's not fully explained as being used to remove the conscious mind and to open up the subconscious. The idea of forgetting sigils was also brought in with this. The idea was not necessarily that the sigil wouldn't work if you don't forget it, because there is some power in reusing sigils that we'll talk about a bit later on. But it was more so that the conscious mind should not be actively trying to engage with the sigil. Rather, it should be firmly buried in the subconscious, where it will be able to gestate properly and form properly without having any of that conscious input on it. Spare would use these states of ecstasy and extreme exhaustion to really bring those sigils deeper in, and it doesn't always have to be the orgasmic state. There's other things like the death posture, which would bring your body to a state of complete exhaustion that the conscious mind would have to be forced out of the way. And there's other methods, obviously, of getting deeper in. In fact, Austin Osman Spare really emphasized that the goal was not necessarily to focus on the pleasure of the state, but really to use it as a focus to create that space where the mind would be able to be subtly influenced and put deep within it, that sigil. So a lot of this is very high overarching theory and history. And if you aren't fully tracking, don't worry, there is a lot that goes into the Zoskia cultus. Again, I highly recommend checking out all these different sources and checking out the description of the video where I'll link some more. Going out of this overarching history, let's actually talk about making a sigil and the different types of sigils that you can make, because there are, yes, those spirit sigils, but also those desire sigils, the sigils that are oriented around the actual goal that you want. There is kind of overlap, I would say. I do have a lot of belief that the sigils you create are active living beings that do have their own ability to be engaged with on a spiritual level as spirits, as individuals. But we'll talk more about that a bit later. So, like I mentioned earlier, there is the letter method, which is where you take your sentence, which should be a relatively short sentence, like, I make $25 in tips today. That's not great. But I make X amount of money in tips today. You take all the letters in there and you remove all of the vowels and you remove any repeating letters, so you're left with only a handful. You then take those letters and you either smash them together as they are, or you take each line, each curve, every little part of that letter, separate it, and use those to reformulate the sigil until it's something that you can't fully recognize as that word. This is a method that I sometimes use. It's not really my preferred method at this point, but it is a pretty good one, and I highly recommend experimenting with it. Further adding on to the actual letter method, I do like to add my own little symbols to it, like little dots, little stars, crosses, and things like that. This is largely drawn from the Goetic sigils. I like how a lot of them look, so I try to make my sigils look kind of like them. It's kind of all based on what is going to work best for you. There is a lot of freedom with these sigils. If you're looking for something a lot more strict, I highly recommend looking into Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, specifically through the spirit delineation methods that teach you how to get the names of spirits, how to draw their sigils in specific patterns and forms. This is actually where the Olympic spirit sigils come from. You can see strong similarities between the two methods. Similarly, the Golden Dawn Rosy Cross method and the number squares of the planets are really good. The Rosy Cross is great for general sigils. There's actually a lot of really easy ways to do this. If you aren't super sure yourself how to make it, just go online and look at it. You can either do this with English or Hebrew. I recommend English if you aren't familiar with Hebrew. Don't try to transliterate it. Hebrew is a very complicated language, and perfect transliteration is going to take some time and some actual knowledge of the language. Similarly, with the number squares, you can just take the numbers, associate them with English letters, and draw that over. Now, the number squares are going to be tied into planets, so you want to look at what planetary forces you're looking to invoke. Agrippa also goes over this, as well as plenty of other people who just dive in depth, both old and modern. So take a look at those. They're a great way to start out when you don't really know where to go with them. Personally, I tend to freestyle my sigils. I don't necessarily use the letter method, especially if it's for a sigil for a goal that I really particularly have a good grasp on. I tend to either automatically draw them a little bit. Automatic drawing is a great way to also do sigils while meditating on the goal or the spirit or anything like that. But I also will take liberty with it, and I like to infuse things like symbols, like especially alchemical symbols I would put into my earliest sigils. I add in all kinds of different symbols and signs that correlate to what I want. So I have a lot of really great old sigils that I still use, but there was one that I created specifically for love drawing, and it was 2 hearts that the center overlapped, created a diamond that I put 2 dots in and a line through that then went out and had arrows going out. It then had symbols of Mars, symbols of Venus, and all kinds of other things going on around it, encased within another symbol that represented salt for the physical manifestation, for the physical bodily results of this sigil, which is getting a little bit ahead into like how I really like to incorporate sigils into physical spell work. But I like to think of sigils as glyphs, right? They are microcosmic images that represent a macrocosmic force. That is what sigils and image magic and spell work really is in general, is a microcosmic form of the macrocosmic force that you want to draw down and say, this is like this, make this happen. Let's draw in that influence. Let's make this world start changing and turning towards that. And really, it honestly just comes down to vibes. Like, if something feels right, then that's what I'm going to go with. If something feels like this is the way that I want to do it, this is how I want it to be set up, yeah, this is right, this is like done enough, then that's the sigil, it's done. And it's a good idea to make several passes before you finally finish out the sigil you want, because you're going to be using this. It's going to be part of the practice, it's going to be part of the actual usage. So make sure that you really like this sigil, right? And this sigil will end up being either carved, drawn, or created in some other physical manner. that can be really used for all kinds of practices. It doesn't even have to be a physical manner. We'll get into visualizations in a little bit, but sigils have so much versatility. Think about what you're actually drawing them with. It's fine if you're drawing it with pencil, absolutely. You can draw it with chalk, you can draw it with paints, with inks, and how those inks are used, how they're being infused into things, whether they're consecrated, all this other stuff. You can really get a lot of good results with experimenting with the placements of sigils, the actual materials that they're being drawn with, what they're being carved into, what they're being created on, and all of that. Really experiment also with like placements, adding sigils together. You could even do something like drawing a spirit sigil, like a poetic sigil for, let's say, Ammon. You're wanting to draw in a friendship, right? You would draw the sigil of Ammon. You would then placate the spirit. You would call the spirit forward. You would then draw various sigils around it that indicate friendship, that indicate these two people. You can even do sigils that represent these two people that you're trying to draw together to bring friends with. And that paper can then be used as an actual base upon which you can build the working on top of. Again, we're jumping ahead into actually using sigils, but that's a great example of one way you could do it. Speaking of a spirit sigil, how do we actually determine the difference between a spirit and a goal sigil? Spirit sigils have a specific spirit tied back into them that can be drawn onto anything to grant their influence onto a particular working. So while I do believe that goal sigils do have spirits to them, they are themselves a spirit that is active, alive, moving, able to be engaged with and further evoked. It isn't necessarily a spirit that is named beyond just the sigil or anything like that. It's not necessarily a spirit that is fully fleshed out yet. There are plenty of examples of sigils that eventually became fully fleshed out spirits. For example, the Ellis sigil is a great example of this, or the Photomenkes sigil. All of those are really great examples of sigils that eventually became fully fledged spirits. But they aren't necessarily always going to be that. If you create a sigil for extra money, it's not necessarily going to be a fully fleshed out spirit yet. But if you draw the sigil of Clonic, that is a spirit who has the influence of money, has the influence of wealth, gaining it, and especially in some very particular manners. So you want to think about the spirits that you're drawing the sigils of and not just draw any spirit sigil. And some spirits also have sigils or other signs that have specific uses and purposes. For example, in the Hecateon, there's a billion, not really a billion, there's actually only 27 sigils of Hecate that each have a different purpose, a different way of being used, worked with, and engaged with, that are all Hecate and specific epithets of Hecate, but they all do different things, all have different powers and ways of being engaged with. So you want to think about how the sigil is being used, why it's being used, and how to actually engage with it. Additionally, spirits might give you a sigil to use, either a sigil that represents them or a sigil just to use in general. I highly recommend asking spirits to give you sigils either in dream, in automatic drawing, or just like directly showing you them or imprinting them into the paper or using your hand to draw them, things like that. Asking spirits to give you sigils is going to be a great thing to do. You can scry on them, you can engage with them deeper and further, and really see how these sigils evolve and form and take on a life of their own. I had also mentioned that goal sigils can either be single use, multi-use, long-term, short-term, things like that. I personally tend to keep a lot of sigils around. I don't have a ton of sigils that I just don't use. I keep a lot of them around, and I find that the more they're worked, the more power that they have. The more that I engage with them, the more that I integrate them, the more that I actually have a practice developed around them, have a practice that really dives deeper into them, and a way that can actually bring them out into a more practical use. That's far better than just thinking of a sigil and then forgetting it. I really like to have sigils that come forward and then being able to call upon that sigil, evoking it, either through actual evocation or just drawing them. Those sigils have particular powers and potencies to them. I highly recommend creating a diverse arsenal of sigils. You can really create them for anything. This is the secret sauce, is that sigils can be used for just about anything. If you need a sigil that will mask a working, for example, create one that masks the spell that you then draw at the bottom in chalk, place the plate on top of, and do the spell work on. Or even if you carve it into the candle, you just draw a little bit of it onto powder and put that onto the candle, things like that. There's really a million ways that sigils can be used, so I'm going to kind of go into several examples now, and then we'll start getting into the image magic, and I'll really talk about combining all of this together and give just a billion examples. Both the things that I've done, some theoretical workings, and some very classical stuff. So first things first, easiest, most basic way to use a sigil is draw on a piece of paper, and that's it. Speak over it, pray over it, do all kinds of things with it, but the paper as the base medium is a really great way to start out. Take the paper, you can consecrate the paper either by the more Solomonic methods that involve hymns and psalms and fumigations and holy water, or simply just, I bless you, O creature of parchment, that you may gain virtue to aid in any of these workings through my highest spirit, amen. Whatever it may be, right? You consecrate the paper, you take consecrated ink and you draw the sigil onto it. Then you speak over the sigil. So let's do a wealth sigil, for example, because I have one in particular that I like to use. So I would take a piece of brown paper bag, I get a green pen that is specifically only used for magic, I draw out this sigil, and I say over it, O sigil of wealth, sigil that brings me money and wealth, prosperity and success in all things, I call you forward now, and I ask you to assist me in generating money for me this day. Come forward and help me obtain all kinds of wealth and ensure that today, especially today, that money comes to me now, immediately, quickly, without further hesitation, through my highest spirits, amen. When I say through your highest spirits, I'm saying that you should say your highest spirit. So, for example, let's say you have a practice with Freya, and she is your primary patron. You say, through Freya and all of her spirits, amen. Or if you have a particular pact with the land that has a particular patron saint or something, you would say, through the saint that rules over this land, amen. Things like that. But then you would take that paper and you can add all kinds of things to it. You can turn it into a packet. Let's say, again, we use that wealth sigil. We might add a little bit of rice. We'll put a little bit of cinnamon around it. Add 3 leaves of bay and add some crushed up basil. Wrap that up, tie it with green string, and then you would cover it with green wax. Keep that on your altar, and you pray over it, you anoint it with oils, you sing to it, you pray psalms over it, all of that, and that's now a packet that is filled with the power and potency of that sigil, which is all about wealth, money, prosperity, and all of that. You can put it into a money bowl, you can put it into a money bag, you can put it into anything like that, and boom, you have a powerful wealth talisman. You have a sigil that is now activated, that is now able to move around and do stuff. And as you engage further with the sigil, you'll start to see it take on more and more life. Again, this wealth sigil that I personally use and I personally have, it's very good at moving around, at having verdant force in it. I find that this sigil in particular has a lot of energy and vitality to it, a lot of fertility in many ways about it. And the way that you can really start engaging with sigils on a deeper level is through visualization techniques. We'll talk about this further in the image magic section, or rather where the two kind of overlap, because there's a lot of great stuff that I do with that. But spending time in meditation on the sigils, focusing on it, seeing its nuances, seeing what colors it likes to present with, what powers it likes to come with, what it feels like when you engage with it, and what you want to feel like when you engage with it, what powers you want to put into it, and what powers you want to seal into it. This is really like the juice that comes with a lot of sigils that I do, is they're not just things that I draw that have power. They have power because I've engaged with them, because I've put things into them, because I've prayed over them in various ways, both the individual sigil and the overarching sigil that I've engaged with on this visual level, that I've sung to, that I've given prayers to, that I've called upon other spirits to empower and to put their presences into, so that when I use that sigil and I evoke it and I have it actually in my mind or on the paper in its own way is the vessel for this sigil. You can create other types of vessels too, obviously, and fill them with sigils. But the power that it has really comes from the fact that it's been empowered in other ways beyond just the physical plane that it's on. And as you're drawing down that spiritual over sigil, I guess, like the spirit of the sigil, and creating a smaller place for it. This also happens with pre existing spirits' sigils. You're drawing them to this place, you're creating a space. It is like the triangle of art in that way. You're creating this space where they are present now, they are able to engage with the world, they have an actionable way to touch down onto this world. You're drawing from that higher spirit and saying, this is where you are now, this is your place, this is how we're going to engage with you. As an example for another example for spirit sigils, you can draw, for example, let's say you have a familiar that you're deeply pacted with. Let's go, for example, one of the planetary familiars that I recommended in the last episode. Let's say you have a Venusian familiar and you want to do some work to draw in clients specifically. You want to draw in clients and you have a fragrance line. So you are already very much tied into those Venusian qualities. You could do a working, for example, where in chalk you draw out the sigil of your familiar. You would then cover that in red roses or any other flowers that they may like. You would then take a glass of wine, set that in the center, and say, I offer this wine to you, spirit familiar, name, under name, all of that stuff. Take this wine, let it empower you. You then take a drop of that wine, touch it to the sigil, and put that wine to the side. Then set over it a green candle marked up with more sigils. For example, the sigil for success is very well known. It's where you take the word success, you take out any letters that aren't S and C, and you turn the S's and the C's into dollar signs and cent signs. That's a success sigil. Really helpful, really great. You might draw that 7 times across. Then you might draw in a client attracting sigils. You might draw in prosperity and wealth sigils. Again, all these things to help and empower the overall working. Think of these like tools for the spirit. These are now tools that the spirit can grab onto and use and wield. There's this concept called sigil shoaling, which is kind of similar to this, where you take all these sigils and you use them together and they all work together. I personally haven't found a ton of success with sigil shoaling specifically, but this idea of sigils as tools for spirits to latch onto, to use, and to affect change in the spell, I have found a lot of great success with that. You would then light up the candle, you oil it, you put your powders on it, all of that good stuff, and then you would say prayers over it and have each sigil come to life and visualize, like really visualize these sigils like glowing, lighting up, your spirit familiar coming in and taking these as tools and using them to draw in clients. That could be an example of something. And if you like that idea, run it by your Venusian familiar. Say, hey, is this something that we want to do? If you don't necessarily have strong mediumship skills, you can pull cards on it. If you don't have Venusian familiar, you can do this with the various sigils of Venus or any other Venusian archetype like Aphrodite, Inanna Ishtar, Astarte, things like that. There's various ways you can engage with this. Another great way to use sigils is by drawing them out in places to have an ambient influence. A good example for a more baneful side of working is you might take the square of Saturn and draw onto it a sigil for illness. Let's go with an illness sending curse. You would then fold that up away from you. You would put that in a little pouch, a black pouch that has the sigil of Saturn or glyph of Saturn drawn onto it in chalk. You would fill it with various nasty materia in either sets of 3s or any sort of multiple of 3s. So you might do 9, though 9 has more correspondence with the moon. 9 is 3 times 3. So you can work in sets of 9. 3 sets of 9 would be a great example of just various malefica. I'm not going to give all of that away because it's a pretty nasty thing to do, but 3 rat's paws might be a good thing to put into there. 3 rat teeth. You would seal that up, again, black wax, black thread. Take that to the target's place of living, bury it, draw another sigil of Saturn over top, and you might spray a little bit of heavy alcohol onto it, or you might light a cigar on top of it, something like that, to feed the earth that's being put into, to placate that. There's just all kinds of ways to really work with sigils. I could list millions and millions more, but really that visualization space is a great way to engage with them. I want to talk about that more in relation to image magic, so I'll hold off just a little bit longer there. But there's just so many ways to incorporate them, really get creative. Again, sigils as tools of spirits, as things that they can latch onto, that give them a way to interface with the world is a great thing to just test out. Or even just how they interface with the spell. Another thing that I'll also give real quick is think of a sigil as a glyph for a larger spell. This is a great way to go about it. I'll give an example of a protection spell where you would set out a table and you would put a cloth over top of it. You would then create a sigil that has whatever symbols you want into it for protection. And then you might set at the center of it a glass of water with a white candle set in it, right? You would then have on either side, let's say it's a more cross-shaped sigil, for sake of example. You would then take 2 knives that have been anointed with various protection and defense, commanding, domination, and attack oil. Set those facing either way out. And let's say it has like 2 stars on the end of those lines. You might put some sort of star-shaped candle holder and put red candles or white candles or black candles, whatever protective candle you would be using, in those candle holders. And you might have it in a circle, right? So in the circle, in the physical world, you would make that out of salt mixed with various protective herbs and oils and psalm ashes, and sprinkle that around. And maybe above the upwards facing and downwards facing parts of this cross, you might have a more crescent shape. So you could create a line or powder of some sort of maybe blessing, attracting herb that would attract the blessing of protection into the shape of a crescent, and then set another candle into that. That could be a way to set up a protection spell that is now also this protection sigil that you might also feed and then do all this other stuff on. And you might have a central candle instead of a glass of water, or you might have a pillar of incense, whatever it may be. I hope that's like a helpful example, and if you have any ideas and want to workshop them, feel free to reach out to me. I would love to workshop them. Workshopping magic is one of my favorite things ever. If you see me on Discord and know me through Discord, feel free to reach out to me there as well. Again, please let me know before reaching out if I haven't previously spoken with you. But this is something that I really love and would love to talk more about in depth. It is a bit difficult to do over a non-visual medium. I might create a YouTube video about this. I think that'd be fun to do. But otherwise, just really think about the way that a sigil could be applied. It's so versatile. There's so many different ways to apply them. And there's also plenty of classic sigils that you can pull from, that you can make pacts with those spirits, or you can see what they're used in. Again, geomantic sigils are a great thing to play around with. Try looking into geomancy. If you aren't super familiar with it, it is a bit daunting. Balthazar Conjure, or BLTHCR, on YouTube has a great video on geomantic spell work, on doing geomantic sorts of practices with magic, and he talks a bit more about the actual use of sigils. John Michael Greer has a book on geomantic magic that I know a lot of people recommend. I've read it. I personally thought that Dr. Al Cummins' classes were better. I highly recommend his classes. Regardless, geomancy is great, has lots of sigils. Go check it out. If you aren't necessarily keen on practicing with specific spirits, you could even look at various things like the PGM sigils, which there's a couple little PGM sigils all throughout, or the various magical characters of the Grimoires, Book of Gold. It has a lot of great ones in conjunction with Psalms if you're really interested in Psalm magic. And just see what ways you can play around with them. Alright, so I've teased this for quite long enough. Let's talk about image magic and how it's actually different from sigils, or if it is different from sigils, and what is image magic overall. So image magic and sigil magic really aren't that different overall. They're like closely related cousins. They're cousins in so many different ways, siblings even, dare I say it. They're very closely related. That's the point of the metaphor. But image magic is the use of any magical image that has an inherent virtue that it acts by. When I say inherent virtue, I mean that it has certain qualities, correspondences, actionable behaviors that the actual image itself imparts by virtue of being that image. It's oftentimes the image of a deity or spirit or a scene from mythology. Those are really the most common ways that it shows up. It can also be the image of an animal, it could be the image of a plant. These have their own qualities that show up and impart a certain ability over it. They're oftentimes drawn on talisman to impart the effects, or paired with sigils and petitions to really further boost this. We see this honestly the most in the PGM, where there is an image of some kind, there's a bunch of names around it, there's a petition, there might be some magical characters or what we might call sigils all around it. We see this, of course, with things like astrological images, astrological magic, and it is a very daunting thing at first, especially those astrological and planetary magical forms of image magic, but it is not that daunting, and it's honestly super cool because you can be so creative with it. Just like sigils, there's ways to create them that are much more organized, formatted, and stricter. But there's also lots of ways to play around with these images to really get what you want out of them. And again, they are oftentimes paired alongside sigils. You'll often see things like draw this image and these characters. These characters form the names of the spirit that you're drawing the image of, or they might be related to certain familiars or powers of that spirit. Honestly, a great thing you could do once you have like those planetary familiars, you could draw the image of the planet. So I mean, there's when I say that, that opens a huge can of worms actually. But let's go with like image in a very basic sense of the word. Let's go with Mercury. It's a very obvious image of a naked youth carrying a caduceus in one hand, having a helmet on with feathers on it or feathered heels, things like that, like the image of Mercury, whatever that may be to you. And then under that, you could draw the Olympic spirit sigil, you can draw the glyph of Mercury and your familiar spirit. And then write your petition, like open up gateways of communication between me and the dead. And then you might carry that on you, present it at a cemetery, set a white candle on top of it, fumigate the area with mastic, and then try to develop your mediumship further by calling upon these various powers or having them already present to augment the effect. And that's just one example that you could do. Now, when I say image of Mercury, there is also things like the Picatrix images, which have particular uses, or the images mentioned by Agrippa that have certain values to them that do certain things. It can be very specific. It can be very, very, very specific in terms of what the actual image is. There's plenty of generic images as well of these spirits. Again, like the image of Mercury is usually paired with Hermes. The image of Saturn is the iconic Father Time wielding a scythe, sometimes accompanied by various other animals. These animals also impart certain image powers too. The PGM often uses animals as stand-ins for deities, so they might have the donkey for Seth or Set, or you might see an ibis for Thoth, things like that. Like there's a lot of ways that animals or even plants could stand in for a deity. You could draw the image of Datura and use that as a stand-in for various deities and spirits that constellate her. You could also create a sigil of Datura and draw that around the image of Hecate, and place that under your salve and make prayers to it, make prayers to the salve, make prayers to Datura, and make prayers to Hecate herself to help attune you more to the power of Datura, before using her and invoking her and giving yourself access to her through the use of that salve. I don't want to talk too much about poisonous plants in this regard because it is something that I don't recommend just doing if you don't have a goal, purpose, or reason to, but it is something that I do quite a bit of work with. I also recommend, doing this with other types of herbs. You can draw, for example, the image of Rue in the hand of Mars to impart protection while he carries a sword in the other hand. You can draw the image of Rosemary surrounding the Virgin Mary for protection and cleansing. And all these images have various uses to them. The image itself has an inherent virtue, it has an inherent quality about it. The most classic example I can think of, honestly, is the head of Medusa. Drawing that is protective because it's the head of Medusa. It scares away evil spirits, it freezes enemies, it causes all kinds of things to just stop coming at you because they see that and they're frightened and turn away. That's a very classic form of you just draw the thing and it works. You can also empower it further. You can add various oils to it. You can hang it on a wall in a particular way. You can fumigate it in various spices. You can elect it under Algol, which is the head of Medusa, Caput Medusae, which can be then added into a charm bag or set upon an altar, or all these different things. You could even elevate the image further. Instead of just drawing it onto parchment, you can create it out of like brass clay and then fire that, and it's now a brass image of Medusa that you can then stuff with all kinds of herbs. You can paint it, all this different stuff. It's really, sky is the limit. And that gets into like my idea of image magic as far beyond just drawing the image. Image magic can be things like statues. Image magic again goes into the microcosmic creation with the circle I mentioned prior, or sorry, with the sigil I mentioned prior. The microcosmic creation. If you're recreating a myth, think about that. You can really work quite well with that. This is honestly kind of the basis for a lot of PGM spells, where they take aspects of myth and transform them into narrative charms or into actual parts of spell works. For example, the secret name of Aphrodite in the PGM, that spell takes a specific myth of Aphrodite and uses frankincense as a part of that compulsion, as a part of that call to the deity, to the queen. There's other parts of it as well, other parts of the PGM that again will like take those images, like the image of Seth, for example, or the image of Aphrodite burning Psyche as Eros stands by, or with Eros on top of Psyche, or as Ares stabs into Aphrodite. Like all these like very honestly graphic images that are used for erotic bindings, they have all of these different components to them that you could also take out of just the plain drawn image. The Ares stabbing Aphrodite one actually is a wax dolly one. You can turn that, and I have seen people turn that into a wax figure candle working. You can draw that image out and set it in front of the operation as sort of a stele, and to have that consecrated, fumigated, whatever you may be, have that adorned in various ways, and then do a working in front of it, and then bury the stele with the working. That's a great way of doing stuff. Again, like you can take the charm to restrain anger with like the box with the two jackal, or I think they're supposed to be donkey heads out. Maybe it's jackal. The two little creatures looking out. It's a very popular, very, very popular and famous one. If you want a good article that goes into it, the Miscellany of PGM Charms to Restrain Anger on With Cunning and Command by Sfinga is great. It talks about a whole bunch of them, but this one in particular. You can take that, you can put various things into the stele, you can then put that into a jar, you can then put that onto the land of someone, you could put that into a puppet to dominate and command them, and then set that underneath your left shoe and just have it sitting there as you fill the shoe with various things, various powerful materia. You could even add more oral charms over that, and more image magic, and more sigils, and all this other stuff. The idea of creating the spell as the image is something that I expand further out with image magic. For example, if you wanted to create a protection spell that invokes one of the myths, let's say the myth of Theseus killing the Minotaur, you could create the image of the Minotaur, right? You could take this image of the Minotaur and cut it off, like cut off the head with scissors, and then you could set that underneath a candle that is prayed over in a particular way, and call upon the spirit of Theseus and say, as you decapitate the Minotaur, decapitates the power of my enemies over me. As you killed the Minotaur, kill the power of this curse upon me. Something like that. It's very simple. You could then, you could do something with the head of Medusa, where you draw the image of Medusa in chalk. You then placate it with wine mixed with some powerful heating up herbs to get her to come to action. Set a red candle on top of that, marked up with more sigils, and say, as you turned all these men to stone, turn this stalker to stone, freeze him in his tracks, stop him from coming to attack me. And then you could fill that empty vigil glass with flowers, with other blessing materia to draw blessings of protection to you, to draw that goodness to you. You could create this also on papyrus with myrrh ink, general good thing, or even just parchment with a new pen that you consecrate, or dragon's blood ink would be good too. And again, like, you would write various names of divinities. I personally go through Hecate, using various name formulas she has, as well as like some of the names of Medusa, throughout both epithets and other names, and then right underneath it, UNN, who goes after, stalks, harasses, does damage to in any way, shape, or form to NN, yourself, or a target client. See this face, behold this fearsome face, and cease all of your actions. Stop in the name of the mighty Medusa, who turns all of her enemies to stone, who vanquishes any evildoers. Let all evil that you do be stopped in its tracks before it ever reaches NN. And then you could roll that up and work it in various different ways. That's a good way of creating your own sort of image magic, is looking at a myth, look at how the spirit was invoked and engaged with, and then creating something in that regard. Another very common image is the saint medal. Very common, so common. It's super easy to get them. They're like $1 downtown where I live. There's so many of them, so many saints who do so many things. And then these medals also sometimes have different qualities to them. Like the miraculous medal is different than any of the other many Marian medals that do all kinds of things. These are great. I love saint medals for so many different things. You can put them into charm bags. You can anoint them with various oils and tie them onto thread and wear those as a protection charm. You can put them into various packets made of pentacles, like a Saint Michael the Archangel medal that you oil up with eyebright and then put into the fourth pentacle of the sun, the one that allows you to see spirits. I don't know why I'm blanking on that right now. I literally just talked about this. You could even add like Saint Cyprian's medal into some Solomonic or Saturnian pentacles, in particular to compel and command spirits to give power and force to you. You can take any saint medal and really just work it, or you can take the image of that medal and draw it out. You can add these medals into all kinds of things. There's ways to really work these medals. I'm trying not to give too much away about some more of my private practices and personal initiations, but these really work. I love them. Experiment with them. Think about saints that are syncretized, there's saints that are syncretized with other spirits, If you can't get the image of Hermes, which you can get pretty easily actually still to this day, look into Mercury metals, are great, but If you can't get the image of Hermes, then the image of St. Anthony will do just fine. Look into what saints are syncretized with what spirits, and if you want to engage with them, there is a good confluence, and they oftentimes don't mind coming forward in the image of that saint. If you know, you know. If you want to work that way, I highly recommend it. Highly, 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 highly recommend it. Again, these saints can also be engaged with the same way that PGM spells are engaged with, or any sort of image magic really is engaged with. If you want to, protect the home, draw the image of Saint Michael triumphant over the dragon and place that in your home. I actually created these talismans for people to see through false friends, to see through enemies, through liars. I created on the front the image of the Archangel Michael triumphant over the dragon, the names of various deities associated with Helios around it. And onto the back, I wrote out a version of the versicle found around the pentacle with some further augmentations and further names. I gave this out to some friends and to some people who wanted them. I created them. They're really nice. I like them. Super simple paper talisman to make, and they work pretty well. And these were then, fumigated, prayed over, offered unto Helios, who I have a really particular relationship with. So it has a lot of specific confluence to it. Think about your own spirits. If you're very heavy into Gaulish practice, draw out the Gaulish gods in particular ways. Draw out these deities in certain forms and in certain aspects. Really think about the aspects of deities too. You can really engage with them on that level. They have particular names that you can call upon and epithets that are there for a reason, that you can meditate on those names and get an image of. This is like a little bit of secret sauce, but you can get images in scrying and meditation and see those images and then draw those images out and actually engage with and use those images in any sort of image magic, any sort of talismanic work, any sort of practice around that, and into spell work too. Another great thing, if you have a dream that has a particularly great omen in it, draw out that omen and both literally draw it out and draw it out of the dream, bring it out of the dream world into the physical world, and have that as a tangible link to bring in the good thing. If you have a dream where you get the job, draw out that scene and call upon your deities to ensure that that scene is now able to be engaged with. Scry into that scene and see what images, what names, what symbols, what sigils come out of it. I have gotten sigils in dreams before that I have then had other people scry on and get particular results from. There's a lot that you can do. I really love dream work. I love the possibilities that it presents. So really engage with it and really see what you can get out of it. Further, just developing deeper into image magic. Again, this goes so well with sigils. Draw out the planetary image that you need, and then draw out the planetary sigils and all the familiar sigils, all the daimons that go around them. There's so much you can just really get into them. The Queen's Talisman, Catherine de Medici, had this famous talisman that had on the front the images of Venus, all of her seals, her angel, her demon, all the stuff, and various names written onto it. On the back, it had the images of Jupiter and all of his powers. And then it was also set in particular times and hours of fumigations, prayers, bloods of all kinds put into it. And it was designed to draw love and power and fortune and all of that. As far as it's documented, it wasn't super effective and it was in fact destroyed, but your mileage will vary. If you get pretty good with this, you can get some pretty great results. And again, there is a level of, if something doesn't work, there's lots of reasons why it doesn't work. It doesn't necessarily mean that the thing is ineffective, but look into it. Look into how these things work out. Look into how they engage with them. See about creating those complex talismanic images. If you're really interested in metallurgy, look into it. See what you can do. Similarly, pentacles are great. Pentacles are that between point of sigils and image magic, where they have these overlaid designs that represent a higher macrocosmic power, but you can also create your own pentacles. Again, Balthazar Conjure has a great video on this. It's talked about in Agrippa. You can also just figure it out. It's pretty easy. You take the technology and imagery of the Pentacles, which there's a ton of Pentacles even outside of the Greater Key of Solomon. Book of Oberon has a lot of great one. The Veritable Key of Solomon has even more Pentacles than just the Greater Key of Solomon does. But look into Pentacles, look into all this stuff, and see really like what you want out of them. See what you can get with this. You can draw Pentacles out, feed them, and evoke the spirits into them, call them up. You can even use things outside of the Pentacles, like the magical characters or even the Triangle of Solomon. You can draw that out. You can draw all these different diagrams and just work with those. You can draw out someone's natal chart. That's an image. You can also like take the various placements and turn those into like the deities, and like you can get the deacons. Like you can get a little crazy with it. So you know, do what you gotta do. But here I want to talk about that visualization technique that I talked about so many times and kept teasing. So I really like, alongside with visualizing the sigil, visualizing the scene. So again, like that wealth sigil, I'll start to build up like a throne of gold and like gold coins. I will say certain prayers and say various charms to call upon these powers of wealth. But I'll also see certain wealth deities that I'm associated with, or deities who bestow wealth in particular ways, and offer the sigil to them and like call them forward in the mind. And the image of that deity is also able to empower the sigil further. This is a lot of how I do sigil work. I'd be remiss to like lie and say it isn't, but like it is really how I do my sigil work. I visualize the sigil, I see it, I combine with it, I meld with it a bit. I draw into various parts of my body as well. I empower it through various names and through various other images that are built up around it. You know, a good example for a love sigil that you could do to draw in a new partner is you create this sigil and you bring it into the mind space, and then you see the goddess Aphrodite before you, her heart aflame, and the sigil going into her heart and being filled with that same flame. And try to see the type of person that you want, and see that person as they're drawn towards Aphrodite, drawn towards the sigil, and as they merge with that sigil, see them descend from the fire of Aphrodite's heart down into your own heart and meld with it and really feel it. And let that sigil become inflamed within you, and see yourself as that same sigil. These two sigils becoming one person, becoming one desire, one goal. Until you really feel the saturation of the magic and that you feel it becoming one. You know, it's like kind of vague and obscure, but you know, it's kind of what I do. It's kind of the main way I engage with sigils. And you can augment this further with prayers, with candles being burned, with other stuff going on. You know, like set a green candle on top of the physical drawing of the sigil, decorate it with flowers and honey and apples and rose incense billowing, and then go into the state and draw it forward. You know, like all this stuff can be done and can really help empower the sigil. There's a lot of just stuff you can do. It's a really versatile form of magic. Again, you can take these sigils and anoint them and then surround them around the statue of a deity, for example. Again, that's an image of the deity that you've baptized and consecrated in certain ways to draw out the powers. You can take sigils and wrap them around symbols of the deity. Oh, one thing I really want to talk about is like symbols of the deity as a sigil. We talked about this briefly with like animals, but for Hecate, a great example is a key. If you take a key and then wrap a sigil of Hecate around it, that's Hecate now. That is fully Hecate. That key can also be baptized in certain ways to become Hecate, filled with certain materia, drawn with other stuff, burned in some particular fires, you know, the usual. But you can really make that sigil of Hecate, you know, the physical sigil of Hecate, the key, into a powerful operating surface. You can, you know, take that sigil, that physical key, wrap a petition in papyrus around it that is marked up with more images, marked up with more sigils and names, and then bury that at a crossroads, which Hecate is the crossroads. That is another macrocosmic sigil of her. By doing work at the crossroads, you are invoking Hecate down. And by creating a crossroads, you are creating a space for Hecate to enter. So those are all symbols and sigils of Hecate that also become images of Hecate. And it just like spirals out further and further. You know, drawing a sigil at the crossroads is drawing a sigil on a sigil that represents a greater construct. So now that I've said all of that, I've kind of gotten like the word sigil to a point where I have no idea what it means. It's a meaningless word now. So I think we're going to start kind of winding things down. But I really hope this was not just completely incoherent and rambly, but somewhat helpful. I know that like there was a lot packed into this episode, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to talk more about it. I'd love to go more in depth with you about it and just like see what it is that can be done with sigils in your life, in your practice, and ways to just make them stronger. There was so much in this episode, and there's probably a ton more that I'm going to realize, like, oh, I really wanted to say this in this episode, and oh, I should have mentioned that. But overall, my final message, as it were, is experiment with everything. See what does and doesn't work. See what makes you happy. See what, like, actually feels good to use. And try things out. I love freehanding sigils. If you're scared about it, try it out. Try and parse through what is scary to you. Sigils can be used in so many different ways, and if you look at some like classic manuscripts, they butcher those pentacles. They butcher those characters. They're so bad. You will be fine, no matter how you draw it. The PGM is notorious for some very weird and obscure looking images, so don't worry about it. What you're drawing is probably beyond fine, all things considered, and will work great. Honestly, a better drawing I've found tends to work faster, work better, more powerfully, because it's drawing on that skill and love and talent put into it. So really take your time with it. Experiment, see what works, see what doesn't. Again, you can make a sigil for anything. I did like the big examples of love, money, protection, cursing, all that. I have made sigils to make work go by faster, to make customers nicer to me. I do so many sigils for just little mundane stuff. It's great. I highly recommend experimenting. And again, it can be really simple, I'll give the example of my speed things up in the workplace, where I drew the sigil out on a day that I was just like, I'm done. I want to go home. And I drew it up. Well, first I went to the back, right? I went to the back and I was like, oh, give me a second. I tore off like a piece of paper. I think it was like from one of the paper bags that we had. I just tore that off, took a Sharpie, drew it. I think I took some like drinking water that I prayed over and then like sprinkled it onto there. Said a bunch of prayers over it, specifically calling upon Mercury and my familiar to bring power to the sigil, and then I like hid it somewhere in the store. We got done with what we were supposed to be doing that day an hour early, and our boss said we could go home before it even hit like noon. So it was great. It worked so well. And I ended up putting that into a sort of sigil exchange that I was doing with a bunch of friends. I love the idea of sigil exchanges. Maybe one day, once I have a Patreon channel, if people are interested in that, I would probably put like a sigilarium exchange in the Patreon Discord if I ever decide to do that. If people want that, let me know. It'd be fun. But we love a smooth transition into my actual services that I currently provide. As I mentioned earlier, I have my website, aidenthewitch.com, where you can book various spellwork services for me. Spellwork ranges in price and can be done for just about any goal or need. I always do divination first before actually taking on clients. But I will be in contact with you about every step of the process. I'll tell you how things are going, where things need to be done, and I ask that anyone who's partaking in spellwork services with me read through all the various parts where I do things based on timing. It's all very personalized, all very tailored, so it might not be done immediately, but it'll be done when it's best auspicious for you. I also highly recommend checking out my divination services that range from cartomancy, geomancy, as well as I offer scrying not individually, but specifically through planetary spirits, where I'll present your petitions and questions to spirits that I conjure on particular days and hours on your behalf. It's a pretty steep price for that because, I have to get a lot of stuff together for it, but it's something that I enjoy doing, so I do not mind providing it as a service. And I also provide a specific type of reading called Spiritual Framework. A Spiritual Framework reading goes through all the various spirits that constellate you, ranging from the types of spirits attracted to you, what your ancestors are like, how they present, as well as various guides and any other spirit that comes forward and wants to help you. If you have a particular spirit that you're interested in forging a relationship with, who you don't know if it's around you, we can specifically look into that spirit, see where they relate to you, who they are, what types of spirits they are, how they engage with you, and all of that. After going through the entire framework, we then do a sorceress framework where we look into how you personally best do sorcery, how you personally are able to do magic, and what areas are affected and impacted and how we can remediate them. Again, all of this is offered through my website, aidenthewitch.com. That is AIDENTHEVVITCH.com. You're also welcome to reach out to me over on Instagram, again at AidenTheWitch. Trying to be a lot more active. If you want to see anything there, please let me know in comments or even in personal messages if you want to. Just, please be respectful. I ask only that. And with that, it's time for our sigilic symphonies. Now, at the end of each episode, I do a little bit of a music segment, which is renamed for the theme of each episode. This time it is Sigilic Symphonies, where we have Desumis Luce, which is by Iluvite, which DESSUMIISLUGE. This is based on a particular curse tablet that is in Gaulish. And while it's not quite exactly a image magic type of spell, it is one of those talismanic spells that fits right into the category that we're talking about. Again, Desumis Luce by Iluvite, and I also have a playlist of all the songs that I recommend. So I'll link that somewhere in the description of the channel, of the show, and the actual episode. And our second song is The Arizona Sword by Leslie Fish, which talks about the creation of image magic into an actual physical object. That's very much the energy of this song, very much the story and narrative going through it. So I feel like that links back more into what specifically I was talking about with creating image magic in the form of spell work in tools and things like that. And thank you all for listening to this episode of Sky Snake Sorcery. I really appreciate you all being here. Please feel free to leave a like, rating, comments are great. I love to hear from people, hear feedback. Again, if you know me on Discord, feel free to reach out. If you want to reach out to me on Instagram, please go ahead and do so. And I hope to see you all in the next one. So mote it be.